Welcome to episode 17 of Give Yourself Some Leeway with me, your host, Eugene Lee. This podcast is dedicated to helping high achievers on the verge of burnout reclaim a healthier work-life balance without sacrificing their growth or success. Today, I am honoured to have as guest with me Lance Woods. Over the last 7 years, Lance has had a meteoric rise from school guidance counsellor to Vice President of Operations with one of America's most prominent behavioural health and addiction treatment service providers. During that time, he became consumed by achievement, defining his value through what he accomplished at work, each day moving farther and farther away from his authentic self. In this episode, Lance and I discuss life after hitting rock bottom in his work-home life balance, how he walked away from his career, seeking purpose and meaning, and dealing with workaholism. If you enjoyed today's episode, join the discussion over at giveyourselfsomeleeway.com, on our social media, or shoot me an email, eugene@leeway.ie. Thank you, and I really hope you enjoyed this episode. It's great to see you've gone from being a school guidance counsellor to Vice President of Operations, and then you've now gone into your role as kind of a specialist coach for addictions and trauma. What I always like to hear when people make that switch into coaching to help others is where they get that spark, where they reach that turning point maybe in their burnout recovery, that makes them want to give value back to everyone else. So I like to hear, where did that spark originate from? Was there a particular point in your burnout or in your in that switch in your work life that everything changed?
Yeah, so I guess a good way to frame this would be to kind of start at the beginning and kind of work my way to what got me here. So I grew up in a pretty lower class family with a single parent. My mom worked pretty much 2 to 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. I started working at a young age as well. I started working in the summers when I was 9, picking strawberries in a strawberry field, just to kind of contribute back to the family and be able to have the things that I wanted, I needed, or whatever the family needed. And so I kind of, at a young age, I was instilled with this work ethic and this sense of that my value and that a lot of my purpose came from work. Fast forward 20 years later or so, I got a master's degree in counseling. I was working in the behavioral health field, various director roles of mental health agencies, so on and so forth. And then in 2015, my daughter was born, which was kind of, for many of us that are fathers, that's a big crossroads point in our life. And my wife at the time, she still my wife, but at that time she was dealing with a lot at work, a lot of stress at work, and she was basically working to pay the daycare bills. And so we decided it would make more sense for her to stay home with our daughter than it would for her to work full time and to pay for daycare. And so at that point, that's where I kind of came to this crossroads of, if we're going to do that, I need to be able to increase my income and I need to be able to increase my ability to support the family. And so I was working as a full-time guidance counselor at that time. I took on 4 additional part-time jobs. I was doing private practice counseling. I was doing some sports coaching. I was doing some on-call work, and I was really working. Oh, and I was also teaching at a university at that time. So I was working 6 to 7 days a week, 8 to 12-hour days, and that's really where I think, for me, work started to become a little too much. And as you've mentioned in some past episodes, in hindsight, you kind of start realizing that, but you don't really realize it at that time. And I created this persona of what I needed to be successful, and was able to have some great opportunities come to me. I always raised my hand when there was more work that needed to get done, or more work that a company needed, and it allowed me to kind of scale that corporate ladder quite quickly. I transitioned into a position in addiction care and behavioral health, and then quickly was promoted to a regional director. Spent a few years in a regional director role. At that time, I had 25 addiction centers across 12 different states, and so I was traveling every single day, pretty much 5 to 6 days a week, really just home on weekends. working 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. every day, really not spending much time with the family. When I was home, I wasn't present. And for me, I equated that with that's what I needed to do as a man, as a provider, to be able to keep our family headed in the right direction. And I had this opportunity to then work with this other prominent company in addiction health and have a vice president role, which was going to be basically developing a lot of addiction treatment centers across one of the states that's near to me. And so right in the top of my head, I said, well, hey, if I'm not flying around the country anymore, I'm going to be home a lot more. It's closer. It's literally in my backyard. And I realized that that wasn't so much the case. It wasn't necessarily the proximity. It wasn't the airplanes. It wasn't anything like that, that it was me that was committing too much to work. And so I did that for a period of time. And again, most weeks I would generally leave on a Sunday night. I'd be home late on a Friday. For the last 5 years or so, I've spent 200 nights or more on the road. So I'd spend maybe 160, 150 nights at home per year. That's including weekends. Wouldn't take time off from work. When I did take time off from work, I'm still incessantly checking my Teams messages, my Zoom messages, whatever it might be, my email, and really never unplugging. And I realized that it was getting to the point where that was unbearable. And I kind of hit this breaking point of what I would call my rock bottom, and really just had to refocus on what my life was. And I will get into that in a little bit, but then really rededicating myself back to the clinical side of addiction care versus more the business side of addiction care.
Yeah, that and I suppose when it comes to that realization, that turning point, were there certain like warning signs that you saw when you were coming towards that breaking point where you realized that you were burning out? I mean, like for myself, I was seeing a lot. Let's say there were things that I overlooked at first, and that was things like I noticed when I first started, the kind of start of the down spiral into burnout is like when you're over enthusiastic and you're driven to get work done, and next thing that energy and motivation started to wane, and I started to compensate for that by like stacking up my car with Mars and Snickers and Monster Energy and Red Bull. And that was like to try and compensate for the lack of motivation and energy that I once had, and I was trying to compensate with caffeine and sugar and snacks. And those bad habits over time took their toll. It was something that like I overlooked at first. The next thing, they just became those tiny habits that became part of my routine, and they started having an impact on my health. And then, of course, over the span of 4 or 5 years, that took a major toll on me and on both my physical health and then also my mental health as I started to fatigue. So I suppose that's just one aspect of it. But were there particular signs that you noticed as you were kind of reaching your burnout?
Yeah, for me, during the time, like you said, I really didn't notice much. It was just kind of status quo, living my life, so on and so forth. And as I reflect back and I look at some of the things that I did, I started to realize that those signs were evident. One of the things that has helped in my recovery was getting involved with Workaholics Anonymous. And they have this thing called the 20 questions, which basically it's a list of 20 questions, and you answer X number of these questions, and it'll basically say whether or not you have an unhealthy relationship with work. I ran through the 20 questions, and I answered like 17 of them as a yes or something like that. And so I thought to myself after taking that assessment, I was like, okay, it's probably going to say if you answer yes to more than 10 or 15 of these, you probably have an unhealthy relationship with work. And so I go through, answered 17 yeses. And then I flipped to the next page and it said, if you answered yes to 3 or more of these problems, then you might have an unhealthy relationship with work. And, some of these things were, working incessantly through vacations, like I mentioned, through dinners, through missing family events, working while driving. I was notorious, and in retrospect, definitely not a good idea, where I would spend a lot of time in the car or in a car driving in between my different programs. And I'd be driving down the interstate 70 miles an hour, 4 or 5 lanes traffic, checking my emails, checking my text messages. And at the time you think, this is what you have to do to be able to sustain the life that you're doing, because you don't want to get to your destination and have 70 emails that you have to sort through and get behind. But then looking at it and looking at that, not being a healthy behavior is not a good thing. For me, a lot of the symptoms that I saw post my kind of rock bottom was more towards the relationships that I have in my life. I've always been pretty good at taking care of myself when it comes to diet, when it comes to exercise, but the relationships are the things that I didn't nurture. And so, in that 5-year period, starting to realize, how disconnected I had become from the ones that I love. My wife, we've been together for 17 years now, been married for 10. And, we hadn't had a meaningful conversation where it wasn't just kind of a trivial, how was your day? What's going on? Or a FaceTime call that was like an hour long a day. We hadn't had a meaningful conversation about, our futures, our ambitions, what's really going on in our life for probably 3 or 4 years. And so missing those aspects, missing the aspects of the little things of being a dad, of, I'm outside pushing my daughter on a swing on the weekend, and in one hand I'm pushing her on the swing, the other hand I'm scrolling through emails for work. And so just not being present for me was the big thing. And it really started to become as if like work was my mistress. So like even when I was home, all I was thinking about was work. I'd be at the dinner table. My wife would be trying to have a candid conversation with me. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I need to do this report. I need to contact so-and-so. This needs to be on my to-do list. And so our conversations became very one-sided, where she would talk and I'd be nodding, and she'd, the old, you're not even listening. And I'd be, oh no, I am. But in reality, I wasn't. And I wasn't giving that, that full reciprocal relationship. On the health side, I would say similar to where you were saying, was I think luckily I was able to manage my health through this 6 or 7 year period of hecticness, where I didn't miss a day of working out. I didn't stray from my diet, so on and so forth. And for me, I think that's really important, because I think of what would have happened if I would have fell into bad habits there, with the stress levels that I had and the amount of work that I was doing. If I wasn't doing those things, what would have happened? 66% of Americans, they die of lifestyle related illnesses, whether it's obesity, whether it's heart related issues, high cholesterol, stress, so on and so forth. And so, I mean, there's no saying what would have happened, but after my whole kind of burnout and leaving that job, my wife had talked to me about how she actually bought baby aspirin to keep in the house, because she was scared that I was going to have a heart attack or a stroke and that I would need to have it here. And I think luckily, partially that probably never happened, because I've paid such good attention to my physical health. But I was lucky in that aspect, and didn't have to go down that road. So.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely one thing that, because you manage your health as well, I suppose, did that come with the line of work that you're in, that you've seen, let's say, other people, the effect on their health of, let's say, addictions and stuff, that it made you more health conscious as a result in your line of work?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And I I'm a kind of a firm believer that peace and discipline in your mind only can happen when you have peace and discipline in your body. And so part of it was that. The other part was that as I was traveling so much, I really had to, I alluded to this a little earlier, but I had to kind of create this other persona for me, which was this I didn't like being away. Even when it started, when my daughter was 2, I didn't like being away from the family much initially. And so I kind of had to create this persona that was a little more cold, a little more disciplined, a little more militant, and just very structured, like very OCD in my behaviors. And so part of that was going through the same routine every day, whether I was on the road, whether I was at home, and that was getting up early. It was doing my morning routines of going for a walk, doing my yoga and stretching, and then working out every day. And that kind of had a cumulative effect. And so, I'm happy for that, because it did keep me healthy. But the byproduct of that was that kind of and I don't want to say cold, but that kind of isolated person that I became, that I had to create to be able to get through the stress of being away from home and not missing the things that I wanted, ended up consuming me over time. You know, when you spend 5 years pretending to be a person or forcing yourself to be a person, you start to forget who you actually are. And I think that was part of, as things were coming to fruition with my burnout journeys, my dealing with workaholism, whatever it might be, was me realizing that I'm not living an authentic life. And so really realizing that this is where I should be and this is what I want to do, but this is what I have been doing and what I've been forced to do to be able to maintain a quality of life, finding that balance. And, you know, it's one of those things where it's still an everyday struggle to find that balance, but it's just making sure that we're taking positive steps every day.
Yeah. And you mentioned, let's say when those workaholism behaviors that you like eventually down spiraled into your burnout and you've hit rock bottom. What did hitting rock bottom look like for you?
So for me, and I guess a good way to prequel this is like when you look at rock bottom and you look at addiction, it looks different in every aspect. You know, we always hear the stories about people that have substance use disorders that hit rock bottom. They overdose. They're in the emergency room. They lose their family. They lose their kids. They lose their job. Whatever it might be. I was lucky enough where a lot of that didn't happen, and obviously this was a process addiction or a behavioral addiction versus substance addiction. But you know, it was really three different incidents of what I would say was my rock bottom. The first was right after my daughter's birthday. I had this really severe sprained ankle that I got at her birthday. We were at a trampoline park and I came down the wrong way and I had this grade 3 sprain on both sides of my ankle, plus four sprained toes. My foot was this big. It was black. It was purple. It was all different colors. And I knew the thing that I should have been doing is resting and recovering and getting this back to where it needed to be, so I could live a normal life. But you know, work had to be done, and so within a couple of days, I was at a hotel, getting ready for a morning meeting. And you know, like you, Eugene, I drink a lot of water, and so in the middle of the night, I woke up, had to use the restroom. My contact lenses were out. It was pitch black, and I couldn't see anything. And my foot is just like radiating in pain. And I spend the next 10 minutes like dragging myself on my hands and knees to the bathroom, to try to find the bathroom and use the bathroom, and then get there and can barely stand up because my ankle is so bad. Realizing that I should have been at home, and that I was really putting my body through too much. And at that time, what I kind of said was, hey, you're a man, suck it up. This is what your family needs. Just do it. Like, you know, that's what society often tells us as men. Like we have to be the strong ones with the weight on our shoulders. We have to carry and push through. And so I told myself that same thing. I said, it's not hurting anyone else. All it's hurting is you. You can shoulder this and you can take this. And so I just kind of continued down that same path. Fast forward a couple months later, and I'm having a conversation with my wife. And you know, she's talking about how 6 months earlier, how lonely it was for her to wake up on her birthday in a bed by herself without me there, without really any support, so on and so forth. And how much that kind of hurt her. And again, I'm thinking like, okay, strike one was like, hey, Lance, you're hurt. We can power through this. And then that kind of second warning sign was my wife saying how much my relationship with work had hurt her at that point. And still back in my head, I'm saying, okay, we're both adults. We can get through this. It's not a big deal. Like, this is just normal stress that happens in relationships. It's not a big deal. Let's just suck it up. Let's keep moving forward and keep pushing. And so really didn't think anything much else of it. And then this was probably a couple months later than that. I was out for my morning run. I was out of town, of course. And I get a text message from my wife as I'm running, and it plays in my ear as I'm going. And they read to me that, hey, didn't get much sleep last night. Lucy was awake all night. She was crying and saying how much she really missed you. And that was the moment that it like hit to me. Right in the middle of the run, I started crying, and realized that my behavior wasn't just hurting me, but it was hurting my wife. It was hurting my daughter. And that was kind of that about face for me, where I said, okay, this isn't healthy. And that's when I really started kind of figuring out an exit plan on how I could get my life back on track. And I was, at that point, it was just a matter of weeks before I ended up separating from my full-time job and taking a good period of time off. I took about a 4-week hiatus to start healing, I guess. As you know, healing can't happen in 4 weeks. Uh, it, it was just kind of that initial start period to be able to recognize what I needed in my life and find the direction that I needed. And in that 4-week period, there was a lot of contemplation, a lot of meditation, a lot of thought, and just a lot of trying to figure out what I wanted to do in my life. And that's when getting back into the clinical world of addiction counseling kind of came back in, where I said, that's where I think I can find some fulfillment. I can help share my journey, and whether it helps one person or whether it helps 100 or whatever it might be, I don't want people to go through the same thing that I went through. When you look at kind of where I was, where you've been as well, the old joke in kind of the corporate world is what the effects of being a workaholic is. You become rich and successful, and like, yeah, those things are great, and there's a lot of people that become rich and successful, but a lot of times they forget all the stuff that they do give up. The relationships, the time with the family, those aspects. And for me, that had just finally gotten to that point where I would say my rock bottom was that giving up those things became too much, and I had to focus on what really mattered, and that was my happiness, my family's happiness, and just time with them.
Yeah, so that was, let's say, when you got that text from your wife about your daughter crying, that was, let's say, the rock bottom where it became so unmanageable. I'd say that was definitely a major turning point.
Yeah, I absolutely, like I said, when you're just thinking about adults having to deal with the stress, like, we're adults, that's what we're made for. We're made for dealing with these. But when you have an innocent, 7-year-old that is doesn't need to be dealing with that, she didn't ask to be dealing with that. That was it for me. Luckily, I had these anchors that could kind of pull me back in and help me with what I needed and get me grounded. And luckily, I thank whatever it is, whether it's God, the universe, I thank it every day that I didn't lose that, because I've heard a lot of stories of people that have had those unhealthy relationships with work or with addiction, and they've lost everything, including their family. And so I'm just grateful that, I was lucky enough to have my wife and daughter continue to stand by me and support me through this.
Yeah, definitely. And like, when you took that initial 4-week hiatus to kind of work on yourself, like, of course, that was only the start of the healing process, that trying to develop that self-realization. But what did you get any help, let's say counseling or coaching, to kickstart your burnout recovery journey after that 4 weeks?
Yeah, actually, for the first time in my life, I did go to counseling. And so that was actually a really tough barrier for me, because coming from a counseling background and being a counselor, I always thought that, hey, I know if I can fix other people's problems and I know what's going on in their world, I can certainly fix mine. And what I started to realize is that you you can't fix a brain with the same brain that broke it. And so it's like a car trying to refuel itself. It doesn't work. And so for the last 30 years, every problem that I've had, I've been trying to fix myself. And so I started with it with an individual counselor, and that's when I started to realize, I think, that the where I was at with this work-life balance and this unhealthy relationship with and workaholism, and how that kind of tied into my childhood developmental trauma that I may have had, and really starting to explore myself more in that aspect. The same stuff that I do with the clients that I work with, but him doing that with me. And then I think, especially when you're dealing with addiction, or you're dealing with instances like this, you referenced this in an earlier podcast about this feeling that you're alone, or it only happens to you. And so, like, it's a unique problem to you, whether it's the burnout, whatever it might be. And so actually I found a Workaholics Anonymous group, and I joined it kind of on a whim. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to see what's going on. And my initial thought was, I'm not going to get any help from this, because these people aren't like me. They're not overachievers. They're not going to be people that had the same job titles, or they're not going to be people that take the same holistic approach to treatment or their body that I do. And I joined a group on a Monday afternoon, and it changed my life. I instantly connected with a couple individuals in that group, who were in very similar circumstances that I was in, but they were the folks that had lost everything. They lost their families. They had no more. They didn't have relationships with their children or their wives or ex-wives at that point because of what they dedicated into there. And it was a good realization to see other people in those aspects. I mean, this is everything from CEOs of companies to entrepreneurs to professional athletes that were in these groups, and seeing that your problems, my problems are not unique, that there's other people out there that are having those same problems, and just being able to have that support and having other people that have went through this journey to help guide you. And for me, that was huge. And so I've been attending groups weekly, just to be able to continue to have those relationships, and to also to be able to provide reciprocal service and talk about my experience, because there could be some new members that are coming into a group, or new people that are coming in, that could grasp something that I say. So.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, going back to the earlier podcast where like you feel that you're alone and you're the only one going through this. And I think as well, especially when it comes to men, they feel that if they do reach out, it's the discomfort of feeling vulnerable and incompetent if they were to reach out and admit that they have an issue with their workload, and that they're feeling that they're burning out or reaching their capacity. And it's realizing that there are communities and support groups out there, that you don't have to go through any of this alone, and there's coaching and everything to help you kickstart your journey. It's you don't have to walk like blindly into your recovery journey once you have that realization that there are supports out there. I think that's definitely a great point to make. I suppose then when it comes to starting your recovery journey, it's all about the tiny habits that we make. Where, as again with the podcast, it's about taking a step back, taking a deep breath, and giving yourself that leeway to be like, okay, the whole journey itself, if you look at it at the whole spectrum of what you can do to help recover, it can be overwhelming. Because if you have to take into account trying to make a work-life balance, trying to focus on where you want to go in your career, how to make time for your family, and it can get overwhelming taking care of your own physical health and self-care. And it's like, what tiny habits did you start to implement to kickstart your recovery journey, so that you could successfully work out that work-life balance today?
Yeah. So for me, and this is one I still struggle with today, is that I don't like, I have trouble justifying time away from my family now to do things for me. So even if that's my own recovery journey, it's hard for me to get onto a meeting or to go to a counseling session for myself, if it's going to cut into family time, right? And so I still have trouble justifying to myself that taking that hour to focus on me is actually better in the long term than it is to maybe spend that hour watching cartoons with my daughter on a Saturday afternoon. I need to look at, for me, it's still a day by day of looking at today and then how that affects the long-term process. And so, me being able to stay safe stay in a place where I'm healthy in my relationship with work could mean that it prolongs my life by 15, 20 years, whatever it might be. But so for me, saying, okay, I'm going to trade an hour every Saturday to focus on me, to live 15 to 20 years longer, is the rationalization I have to do in my head every day. You had an episode, I think it was episode 4 or 5, where you were discussing how to create different habits. And that was another aspect. And so for me, a lot of it was being able to implement basically that same approach of looking at what were unhealthy habits in my life and figuring out how I could replace those. And some of that was kind of some cognitive training and restructuring in my own brain of when I used to be driving and all of a sudden I'd think, oh, I need to check my email, because if I don't get to this email, I'm not going to do my job, so on and so forth. And then there's going to be this catastrophic downfall. I'm not going to get promoted, and kind of catastrophizing that. So that was my justification for picking up my phone and checking my email when I'm driving. I got to stay ahead of the game. I got to continue to give value back to the workplace. For me now, I mean, every day when I'm driving to work, when I'm driving home from work, I still have that thought of, hey, I need to check my phone. I might have a message. There might be something going on. But for me now, it's the restructuring of, I know if I pick up that phone, that's one step closer to being that guy I don't want to do. And rather than thinking what I'm going to lose at work, I start thinking of what I could lose in my home life if I pick up that phone. And so it's that same habit and just challenging that thought of, okay, if I pick up this phone, then I'm driving. That's not safe. Like, let's not do that, especially in traffic. But then I'm thinking, okay, that's one more boundary that I'm stepping over. And when you step over one boundary to the negative, it's going to start compiling. Like, it's going to have this cascading effect of, now I'm checking my phone at work. Now I'm working through dinner again. Now I'm back on the road. And so reminding myself, rather than the negatives of what could happen at work, reminding myself of the negatives that could happen in my home life or in my personal life. And really trying to find that balance. And then at the same time, trying to reinforce my positive cues. And so making sure that I'm taking time. One of the things that I did was I set some bottom lines of, these are the things that I'm not going to do during the work week anymore. And so I very clearly outlined, like, I'm not going to work more than 45 hours a week for someone else. So if I'm getting close to those hours, it's like, okay, I need to check in with myself. I need to take a time out. I need to see what I need to do. And really just trying to hold myself through those. Another one was that I'm not going to work through lunch breaks or through meals. And so even when I'm at the office or whatever it might be, not multitasking when I'm eating food, little things, and just checking in. And every single day, it's a reminder. Like, literally, I sit down with my lunch, whatever it might be. I pick up my phone and I start checking my email, and I'm like, okay, no, I said I'm not going to do this, and just really trying to reinforce the good habits. But it's one of those things, like, as you know, it's a lifelong journey. And that's when they look at addictions, whether it's substances or process and behavioral. That's why there's the saying, like, in Alcoholics Anonymous, that, you always introduce yourself as, I am an alcoholic, because it is a lifelong battle. It's not something I'm not thinking that in 10 years I'm going to all of a sudden not have any problem with checking my phone at lunchtime or with overworking. It's a constant reminder every day, and it's a constant battle, and winning one day is success. And that all those one days of success are going to add up to long-term recovery.
Yeah, 100%. And I do like the point you made there, where you said about checking your emails while driving. And the point you come back to is, I don't want to be that guy again. I'm trying to set that boundary. I think a lot of people, when they start their journey, they realize that they have to have a mindset shift, but there is also an identity shift that comes with trying to introduce these new habits. And it's about, yes, also realizing that you are still a workaholic, you still have those tendencies, but it's about you making that decision not to do those, let's say, the unproductive or bad habits, the kind of almost a self-sabotaging habits, and you choosing to reinforce the good habits that will, reinforce the work-life balance that will help you, spend more time with your family and set that work boundary. And you'll also be more productive and more creative, and in the work that you do, when you're more mindful about how you do it, if that makes sense.
That absolutely does make sense. And another thing I guess I kind of want to highlight is, I think you mentioned this earlier, was that men not wanting to reach out and get help, and that struggle to be able to do that. And we have, like I said, we have society telling us this is what we're supposed to shoulder. We have all these kind of I guess, for lack of better terms, idiots on social media talking about what men should be, and how they need to be tough, and how they need to be gruff, and they need to do this, and they need to exercise control over their domain and all that. And I think it's creating this society of men that are completely out of touch with their emotions and out of touch with what their true purpose is, and they're not living authentic lives. And so we, as men, we need to ask for more help. We need to, when we need support, we need to be willing to ask for it. We need to self-explore. We can't just bottle up our emotions and swallow them. Dr. Gabor Mate, he uses this analogy of, when we suppress emotion and we suppress anger or whatever it might be, of trying to shove a giant beach ball underwater. And so, like, the surface of when you have a beach ball above the water, it's pretty light. It's not too hard to handle. But then if you have this giant beach ball and you're trying to stuff it underwater, the resistance starts pushing it back. The longer you hold it, the harder it gets to hold, until eventually it just pops out of the water and explodes. And like, I think what we see in society a lot of times with men is we're pushing that beach ball down. We're trying to just suffocate those emotions. We're trying to suffocate those aspects of where we feel weak. And that's not doing any good, because ultimately it's going to explode. It's going to result in us lashing out at ourselves, at others, having burnout, having fatigue, whatever it might be. And we really need to be more in touch with what we do, and being more in touch with ourselves, and kind of explore those emotions and be able to change that dynamic of us wanting to seek help. And I think that that's one thing that you've been doing absolutely great, and I applaud you on, is just creating awareness towards men seeking mental health needs. It's we still have a long way to go, and I'm very scared for future generations, I guess, because especially coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing, not just with men but with people, we're seeing all of the makings of what's going to cause a very stressful life and unhealthy mental health patterns. So we're seeing people dealing with substantial amounts of loss, financial problems, increased isolation, all these things that we've had over the last 3 years during the pandemic. And I don't think we adequately as a society have the support necessary to be able to provide what's needed for all of these individuals that are going to be rebounding from this. And so as treatment providers like myself, or podcasters and coaches like you, I think there's going to be a lot of need for us in the future, because there's going to be more and more people that are going to need that help. And again, just really, we need to echo that message that it's okay to reach out for help, and it's okay to say that I'm weak, and it's okay to be able to say that you need that, because that's the true sign of strength, is being able to reach out for help when you're weak. And we just need more of that.
Yeah, 100%. And going on from, let's say, these habits that we've developed, let's say, on the recovery journey, and going from, let's say, you're busy, let's say, working as a director to and a counselor and everything, going into coaching, and it was almost, it's part of your recovery journey that kind of led you into coaching to help others.
Yeah. So, and I was a counselor prior to me getting into kind of the corporate world as well. And so my initial thought back then was like, okay, I'm a counselor. I can have an impact on maybe 50 lives of people that I see. And then what happened was, okay, now I'm a director. I have a whole program underneath me, a whole facility. Now I can have the impact on 500 lives. And then that math kind of continued to compound, where then I became a vice president, and I had across multiple states, I had maybe 5,000 patients under my care. So I was like, the same ideals that I had as a counselor, and the same quality of care that I had as a counselor, I can try to affect 5,000 people. I think what happened for me there was, because, and this is very common in the healthcare field, is because it's kind of that selfless profession. You always do too much, and you always want to do more and more and more. And so there's not the ability to set that boundary, because in many cases it is life or death. Like, if you don't answer that call at 7 o'clock when somebody's in crisis, it could turn out very poorly. And so for me, I think what happened was, I got so engulfed in the business side of what I was doing, and yes, wanting to grow programs and wanting to increase access to care for more and more people across the country, that I fell in love with the business side, and I forgot the reason why I actually got into this. And that was like to touch that one person and touch that one individual, and to be able to help one person through a struggle. I think I was very good as an executive and very good in the healthcare field, but I think for me, my passion and where I find more purpose is in those one-on-one interactions, and being able to see those very small incremental changes that a person can make and can turn their life around. And so I think that's what kind of drove me back into one-on-one clinical care, was missing that aspect of that interpersonal connection with individuals and helping them through their journeys. When you look at counseling, I think a lot of times there's this misconception in society that a counselor's job is to help you solve your problems or give you advice to solve your problems. And I kind of see more counseling more of a joint spiritual journey. Like if you and I were working together, Eugene, you're the one driving the car. I'm just the one sitting in the passenger seat giving you some prompts to get to where we need to be. And so, ultimately helping people realize what they want, being able to live that authentic life and hit that period of self-actualization where they're happy with their life. And me just kind of poking at them a little and saying, this is how we might be able to get there. And understanding both from a personal perspective and then also from a counseling and coaching perspective that not everybody's recovery journey is going to look the same. What worked for me in my recovery journey isn't going to work for you or isn't going to work for this other person, but it's really working within the aspects of what they do to help find what's going to be successful for them. Because reality of the situation is I'm not going to be involved in these people's lives for the next 20, 30 years. We may have a 1 to 5, even 10-year relationship in this recovery journey, but ultimately the habits that they instill and the successes that they have to learn to maintain on their own. And that's my goal in counseling and in therapy, is to be able to work myself out of a job. The day that that person doesn't need me anymore, although it comes bittersweet because I'm going to miss the relationship, they're going to miss the relationship. It's also one of the happiest days in the therapeutic relationship because we know that they've graduated to a point where they can sustain themselves.
Yeah, 100%. And that's a great approach to have. As a coach as well, where you're, as you said, in the passenger seat, giving them the props to get there, rather than guiding them every step of the way. That you're providing the tools and the techniques to help them, rather than like giving them, let's say, every step by step, follow the rule book. It's a much better approach, and it's giving them the guidance rather than giving them every direction.
Yeah, 100%. And it empowers them in their journey. And when you're empowered in your journey and you're the one doing the work, you're more likely to have results. And so, that's a big part of what I do, what you do as a coach as well, is giving the people the tools, helping them with what they need to feel empowered that they can do this on their own. And again, it may be a year, maybe 3 years, maybe 5 years, but eventually they're going to get to that point where they can do it on their own. And that's going to be where they have long-term success.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Lance, I suppose if you wanted to give three key takeaways that you want to give to the listeners about burnout recovery and let's say what steps to take, maybe in realizing that they may be experiencing burnout, and how to start their journey, and maybe small habits to help them kickstart their recovery journey, and what steps to take.
Yeah, I think we just touched on one of them. And so simply, I think is that people need to be aware that the same approach doesn't work for anyone. So just because you're listening to this podcast and you're hearing how I deal with things and things that I was successful with, or you listen to some of Eugene's past podcasts and see things that he did that helped him, that's specific to our journeys. And so realize that although you might be able to get some tips from there, and some of those things might work from you, but everybody's picture is going to be different. And everybody's course of treatment is going to be different. Some people might be able to bounce back within 2 months, 3 months. And then for some people, it's going to be that lifelong journey where there's going to be constant reminders of this is what I need to do to stay healthy. And this is that line that I'm toting every single day between burnout and between kind of homeostasis, or this is the line between addiction and a normal life. And so just realizing that the same approach doesn't work for everybody, and that this journey is your own journey. Don't get discouraged by what happens, so on and so forth. There are going to be relapses along the way. There are going to be moments, whether it's in substance addiction, work addiction, behavioral addictions, burnout, there's going to be times where you're pushing that envelope, or you might have a full relapse. And that's okay. It's being able to respond from that and work back through that. I would say second thing is on that same concept of progress over perfection. If I asked you to, if we decided we were going to go run a marathon tomorrow, we wouldn't just get up and run the 26.2 miles. It takes day over day improvement. You got to start with 1 mile, 2 miles, and work your way up. And understanding that in life, you don't have to go from 0 to 100. With people, especially with high achieving people that have personalities that are all in, they want to be able to recover like this and say, okay, I had this problem, let's just hop in and let's do it. And they almost become addicted to recovery. And when you become even addicted to recovery, you're going to burn out, and it's not going to have that long-term sustaining effect. So basically focusing on progress over perfection. And then especially in the issues that we've struggled with work and work-life balance, there's no such thing as total abstinence. Like, well, there is if you're lucky enough to not have to work, but for most of us, it's really finding that balance of, if the pendulum swings to 100 of you overworking, and then there's the other 100 of you not doing anything. Most people aren't going to be at that negative 100. So it's finding that middle sway point and finding that place where you can still exist in both work and life without tipping the scale one way or the other. And then I would say number 3, and this is just one of those things that comes to you, I think, as you get a little older and as you start to realize different aspects of your life, especially in the workaholics or the folks that are just driven by success and by titles and other aspects, is that, time's our most valuable asset. It's more valuable than money. It's more valuable than anything else out there. And so I know a lot of us in this field, we're chasing money and we're chasing success, but at what expense? If you ask most millionaires, billionaires, when they're on their deathbed, if they could do, and if there's anything they could have more of, they would say time. Money is a finite resource, money is an infinite resource. You can essentially get more money anytime that you want. You can spend money, you can make more money. It weans, but time is the one thing that's kind of finite. You can't get it back. You can't go back and make up time. You can't get more time added to your life, and you can't. It's just something that is there. There's no recouping it. And so understanding that and realizing how precious time is, and making sure that you are carving out time for things other than work. Spending time with the people that you love, spending time with yourself, checking in with yourself, doing mindfulness practice, taking care of yourself, and just having some alone time. Those are moments that you're never going to get back. You're not going to remember when you're 70, when you're 80, 90, whatever it is. You're not going to remember what it felt like to get that promotion at work, or that time you stayed up all night to finish a report and you got a pat on the back. What you're going to remember is the smile on your daughter's face when you come home from work. You're going to remember staying up late with her playing video games or just joking around and playing board games. You're going to remember those late night conversations with your wife, the anniversaries, the dances, whatever it might be, the things that a lot of times you miss when you're surrounding yourself with work. And so I'd say just be cognizant of that and don't undervalue your time.
That's great, Lance. And I suppose for anyone who wants to hear more from you, where is the best place that they can find you and what you have to offer?
Yeah, so 2 different ways. On Instagram, if you want to follow my personal account, it's Lance1Woods, and that's where I just kind of focus. I post my day-to-day life, my workouts, other sorts of things. And then my work account is Psychological Healing. So not psychological, but PSYCHELOGICAL. So Psychological Healing. And then also my website is www.psychologicalhealing.com. And you can find out more about, me as a professional, also available on LinkedIn, both of those same things, Lance Woods and Psychological Healing. So if you want to find out more, book a consultation, anything like that, you can do that through those sites.
Great. And I'll throw those links in the show notes as well. So that's great. That was amazing, Lance. And I really hope to maybe have you back on the show again. Well, I hope you liked this episode and I hope you found it helpful. And if you did, subscribe to the show, because it makes sure that you don't miss out on new episodes. And it also helps me because it increases the rankings of the show a little bit, which of course makes it a little more easily found by other people who may like it just as much as you. And if you didn't like this episode or anything about the show in general, or if you have any ideas or suggestions or just feedback that you want to share, shoot me an email, eugene@leeway.ie, and let me know what I could do better, or just what your thoughts are on what you'd like to see me do in the future. I read everything myself. I'm always looking for new ideas and constructive feedback. So thanks again for listening to this episode, and I hope to hear from you soon.